Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. America is holding back some of its weapon deliveries to Ukraine amid fears that Washington's own stockpiles have fallen too low. So what will this mean for Kyiv? More on that in just a moment. But first, tonight's headlines. All roads lead to Moscow over alleged GPS jamming in the Baltic Sea. Can Europe drastically slash greenhouse gas emissions by 2040? And a lesson from space for Polish students. The Pentagon has halted some shipments of air defence missiles and ammunition to Ukraine over concerns that America's stockpiles are too low. The decision was made in the wake of a review of the Pentagon's arsenal and comes just days after Russia's largest air assault on the war-torn country since the invasion began. Our correspondent Oz Chatterjee is standing by in Kyiv and joins me now. Good evening, Oz. So what do we know?
So we understand that a shipment that included about 8,500 rounds of 155mm NATO standard artillery shells, but also at least 30 Patriot missile interceptors. These are used for Ukraine's really advanced American air defense systems. The Americans are the country that produced this weapon, and it's used to defend Ukraine's territory from fast-moving ballistic missiles launched by Russia. It's one of the few weapons air defense systems that's able to deal with that incoming threat. And the view here from Kyiv is that more Ukrainian civilians will die as a result of them not being able to intercept these Russian missiles that have been coming in very heavily over the past few weeks. The biggest air attacks on Ukraine have been ramping up steadily over the past month or so. Now, this decision was made by Elbridge Colby, who's the Under Defense Secretary for Policy in Donald Trump's White House. It's important to note that Elbridge Colby is a long-standing critic of sending any weapons shipments to Ukraine. So this has been a policy that he has supported for a long time. So this defense review, which may be the reason that the Pentagon are putting forward, doesn't add up to this policy decision necessarily, given the history of those involved behind making this decision. These are people who have long opposed sending Ukraine these weapons. Again, it's important to contextualize this. These are not weapons promised by Donald Trump. These are weapons promised, agreed by the Biden administration, passed through Congress, that have already been agreed to be sent to Ukraine. Some of them, we understand, are currently in Poland, ready to be shipped into Ukraine when this decision has been taken. So this is a devastating piece of news for the Ukrainians, who have been lobbying. President Zelensky's been lobbying President Trump, particularly over the recent NATO summit, to which Trump seemed to signal that he may be willing to send more weapon systems, more Patriot systems to Ukraine. That's what Ukraine has been lobbying for. Further weapon systems, further Patriot systems. So to hear this news that the promised systems that they were expecting to be delivered now won't be delivered is causing huge concern and alarm here. Now, President Zelensky says that Kyiv is seeking to clarify what this policy is. There were much more stark terms coming from the Foreign Ministry. Foreign Minister Andrei Shabiak, Ukraine's top diplomat, summoned the acting US envoy earlier in the day once that news had broken, and a stark warning was issued to the acting US envoy, saying any delay or hesitation in supporting Ukraine only encourages the aggressor to continue the war and acts of terror rather than seeking peace. So it's very clear where Ukraine stands on this. It's unclear whether this policy is being put forward by the White House or being put forward specifically by this branch of the Pentagon. It remains to be seen. The Ukrainian officials speaking to Reuters said they were totally shocked by this decision. So it's one that has come completely blindsided the Ukrainians. They're going to be trying diplomatically to try and change the situation. But look, when it comes to more weapon systems, more deliveries, what Kyiv has been angling for, this spells very, very bad news for that going forward. Back to you, Aaron.
That's our correspondent in Kyiv, Oz Chatterjee. Thank you. Tensions are rising in Poland over the government's decision to temporarily roll out border checks with Germany and Lithuania. Prime Minister Donald Tusk says the move is, quote, necessary to stem the uncontrolled flow of migrants. But the figures tell a different story. Paweł Trzaskowski explains.
The scale of migration from Germany to Poland is decreasing, according to the Polish Ministry of Interior. Many of those who are sent back to Poland are not illegal immigrants at all. Some of them are Ukrainians who came to Poland after the Russian full-scale invasion in 2022.
Those who are not admitted to Germany, they can be people who are legally in Poland. They have a Polish visa. By the way, these visas were issued by the previous government in great numbers. They want to go to Germany, but they don't have German visas, so they can't get in.
And the German side says that no asylum seekers who are already in Germany are being sent back to Poland.
I would like to clarify once again, because this has apparently been reported in some media in Poland. There are no repatriations from Germany to Poland of asylum seekers who have already arrived in Germany. There are none, and there will not be any.
But the situation on the border is nonetheless causing a stir.
In my opinion, much more of a domestic political crisis than a migration crisis.
And one of the results of this domestic political crisis is
the presence of the far-right strong-arm groups that are, apparently successful in influencing the government policy.
These citizen patrols are operating illegally.
These initiatives, I'll put it lightly, are a mockery. How can you just stop any car, perform checks? Who gives them the right to do so?
But they receive backing from the politicians of the Polish right.
The impotent state has failed once again. Everyday people have to protect the borders. We will not leave them to fend for themselves. Law and justice politicians will go to the border. We will be supporting the people who are fighting for the safety of our families.
To which authorities have responded by calling it an obstruction of government action.
The more we regain control of our borders, the more we are attacked by Law and Justice, the Confederation Party and their militias. First, they let in hundreds of thousands of migrants from Asia and Africa, cashing in on the visas along the way, and now they are paralyzing the work of the border guard. We will not let that happen.
Apart from calming the tensions on the Polish-German border, Tuesday's decision to reintroduce border checks is supposed to seal the Polish border with Lithuania, now the main trafficking route of illegal migrants from Belarus. The border checks are meant to be dynamic, according to the Polish Ministry of Interior. No permanent border guard stations are to be reinstated. The checks are to begin on Monday next week. Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
Russia is again being accused of orchestrating GPS interference incidents across the Baltic Sea as part of Moscow's hybrid war in the region. At the same time, Poland is assuming the presidency of the Council of Baltic Sea States, which was formed more than 3 decades ago. And as John Todd reports, Warsaw will have a lot on its plate.
Lithuania last month, a drill live-firing HIMARS rockets at a target in the Baltic Sea. And it's here that Russia is waging a hybrid war of seabed sabotage, disinformation, cyber attacks and operations by its so-called shadow fleet, all aimed at testing NATO.
They want to destabilize Baltic societies and undermine our, let's say, NATO commitments.
There were fresh reports of significant GPS interference, which could be catastrophic for airlines, as Poland on Tuesday assumed the presidency of the Council of the Baltic Sea States, an organisation Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski described as key.
In the face of the challenges posed by Russia's aggression against Ukraine, we intend to continue our regional cooperation. We will prioritize the protection of critical infrastructure and the prevention of hybrid threats, including those posed by the Shadow Fleet.
The organisation was formed in 1992 and is now made up of 10 member states and the EU, after Russia was expelled in 2022 following its invasion of Ukraine. Analysts say Poland's time at the helm may see significant changes following a report published in May.
In this report, we can essentially read that the old purpose of the organization is kind of expiring. So the cooperation in the domain of culture, domain of soft security.
Of the CBSS into a hard security-focused organization.
This is one of the roles of the presidency, is to think how to reform and refocus the CBSS in order to be an effective organization, in order to effectively meet the challenge of the new security environment.
Analysts say GPS interference is particularly prevalent around Kaliningrad, where Russia tests different signal jamming technologies. As Poland starts its year-long role, it can expect Russia to make waves in the Baltic Sea. John Todd for TVP World.
Belarus has freed another group of political prisoners just a week after the surprise release of well-known opposition figure Serhiy Tsikhanouski. But this time there are no notable dissidents involved, and experts say Alexander Lukashenko's regime may have a bigger plan in mind. Piotr Mischuk reports.
8 men and 8 women have been freed by the Belarusian regime in the latest round of releases this year. Officially, their release is being portrayed as coinciding with Thursday's Independence Day of Belarus, but analysts say it's an effort by Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko to salvage his country's crippled economy.
Russian economy is exhausted. Belarusian economy is also shrinking, is also hit by shrinking of Russian economy. So he wants this war to be frozen, and he acts in a way to show his willingness to freeze this war, and he releases political prisoners as an invitation to show his openness to the negotiations.
The full list of names hasn't been made public yet. The released reportedly comprise prisoners suffering from chronic diseases, people who have small children, and the elderly. It's also uncertain whether any Polish citizens are among those freed by the regime. Commenting on the issue, Poland's Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz said his country is actively working towards the release of Polish nationals.
We remain dedicated to supporting all Polish citizens who are affected by repression, the regime, or imprisonment.
What is almost certain, however, is that Polish-Belarusian journalist Andrzej Poczobut will not be among the released, and it's unlikely he will regain his freedom in the near future.
I really hope that in some of the batches of these prisoners released, we will see Andrzej Poczobut, because the process is going on. But I don't know whether he will be released until this process of negotiation stops.
Though various reports indicate that the Belarusian dictator has released more than 300 prisoners since July 2024, their former political prisoner and husband of opposition leader Światlana Cichanouskaja, Serhiy Tsikhanouski, who was released by the regime in June, called on the West not to ease the pressure on Lukashenko.
You have to play a different game with him. We will put even more pressure on you if you don't release the people. We will increase the pressure if you don't stop the repressions.
Despite several rounds of releases, the Belarusian human rights group Vyasna says the number of political prisoners held by the Minsk regime totals more than 1,100 people, including Nobel Peace Prize winner Ales Białacki. For TVP World, I'm Piotr Mischuk.
Europe is engulfed in a heat wave with record high temperatures for the month of June. And as wildfires tear through regions of Spain and Turkey, the European Commission has revealed its new target to reduce carbon emissions by 2040. Our correspondent Alex Cadier is in Brussels with more. Good evening, Alex. How has this current weather impacted the Commission's thinking on climate change?
Well, good evening, Aaron. It's been a scorcher here in Brussels almost all day, but this being Belgium, of course, it's now blustery and raining. But nevertheless, you rightly pointed out, the last couple of weeks we have seen some pretty extreme weather events across the continent. We have seen those wildfires in Catalonia, which claimed at least 2 lives. Wildfires, you mentioned, tearing through Turkey. Winemakers in Italy saying that their harvest is burning on the vine. This is a continent-wide issue, and of course brings a sharp focus on that decision by the European Commission today on its climate targets. Absolutely the heat on the European Commission today to make a decision. They point out that 85% of Europeans polled care deeply and are worried about climate change. That decision by the European Commission, therefore, to stick to the target of a 90% reduction in carbon emissions by 2040, is 90% from levels in the 1990s, has stuck. Now, that has been welcomed by some environmental groups, but others have been critical, saying that a small change to this policy, which allows some countries to offset their carbon emissions by investing outside of the European Union, is effectively a bit of a get-out-of-jail-free cause. That, of course, goes against the advice of European Commission scientists themselves, who say very clearly any concessions, any offsetting possibility jeopardizes the entire decarbonising programme. Well, Commissioner Hoekstra, the Dutch Commissioner for Climate, responded to that exact accusation earlier today. Let's have a listen.
The planet doesn't discriminate where emissions are being put into the air, right? Frankly speaking, doesn't matter for Europe where we actually reduce. So we think it is fair game and actually smart to do the vast majority here, but also allow our companies and our countries to be flexible at the last couple of percentage points. And if that is cost effective, because that will be the main driver of it, then get that outside of Europe.
Of course, that flexibility that the Commissioner just mentioned, directed at France, directed at Poland, directed at countries that haven't completely decarbonised. Poland, of course, still the most heavily reliant on coal in the European Union, despite a plan to phase out by 2046. That might be a little bit late for the 2040 target. There has been pressure on the European Commission to offer some flexibility, to offer some concessions on this very ambitious target. In the big picture sense, the Commission sticking to its guns, we will see a dramatic reduction in carbon emissions by 2040, but a bit more flexibility on how to get there. Aaron?
Alex Carrier, our EU correspondent in Brussels, thank you. Now, a lesson that Polish students won't easily forget. The country's trailblazing astronaut Sławosz Uznański-Wisniewski connected live with school kids on Wednesday from the International Space Station. He also spoke with Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk as he marks the halfway point in his 2-week space trip. Kazimierz Shabiak reports.
Station, this is Poland. How do you hear me?
Hello, good morning, Poland. I hear you loud and clear, as we call it 5x5.
Sławosz Uznański-Wisniewski is the second Pole to ever go to space and the first to board the International Space Station. While he's busy conducting scientific experiments for the European Space Agency, he's also found the time for unique lessons for Polish students directly from space.
Hi, I'm Janek. How do different conditions up there influence your everyday activities like sleep?
I had to get used to all of this in the beginning for sure. As you can see, we can move slowly or quickly, but you need to get adjusted to the feeling of weightlessness. You mentioned sleeping. Indeed, it was difficult at first as all my limbs were just floating in the air, not resting on any surface.
Apart from answering questions from students, the Polish astronaut also had a chat with Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk.
The Polish youth are now looking up to you. You are their hero. What message do you have for them?
Space has been inspiring for me since I was a kid, and it continues to inspire millions of Polish boys and girls. I hope they are even more inspired now, not only by space exploration, but also by science and scientific discovery.
Sławosz Uznański-Wisniewski will be on the ISS for 1 more week. Back on Earth, TVP World spoke to someone who is especially eager to see the Polish astronaut return home, his wife Aleksandra.
The capsule is going to re-enter the atmosphere with this incredible speed and with incredible heat as well, surrounded by a heat shield and a plasma. And at some point, actually, the mission control in Houston loses the contact with the crew for a dozen of minutes, so-called a blackout due to plasma. And this is the moment when we all sort of hold our breaths and we wait until the communication is going to be reestablished, and they splash down to the ocean, hopefully, safely.
Sławosz is scheduled to conduct up to 13 experiments aboard the ISS before returning to Earth. These include engineering problems, but also tests of the effects of microgravity on the human body. Upon his return, he will be engaged in educational and academic activities, describing his experience in Earth's orbit. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Łysiak.
Serious matters in a friendly atmosphere. That's how Poland's president-elect Karol Nawrocki is describing his first formal meeting with NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte. In a brief post on social media, the Eurosceptic Nawrocki says they discussed security guarantees and responsible international relations.
In response to an invitation, I met with the Secretary-General of the North Atlantic Alliance, Mark Rutte, today in Brussels. We discussed cooperation within NATO. The guarantee of security and mutual understanding of needs forms the foundation of strong and responsible international relations. Thank you, Secretary-General, for a very good conversation about serious matters in a friendly atmosphere.
And joining me now to break down Karol Nawrocki's meeting with Rutte and what we can expect as the clock counts down to August's inauguration is Alex Shabiak, Professor of Politics at the University of Sussex. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
So clearly Mr Nawrocki is trying to network ahead of that inauguration on August 6th. What does this sit down with Rutte, and we saw some pretty relaxed photos of the pair, what does that tell us about how he views this relationship with NATO and indeed Mr Rutte himself?
Well, the first thing it tells us is that is that Karol Nawrocki wants to be a very active president. I mean, it's a month before his inauguration, and he's already meeting with international leaders. He's already setting out an agenda, a policy agenda, both domestically and internationally. And I think one of the important areas where, although the president isn't involved in day-to-day foreign policy, one of the important areas where the Polish president can insert themselves into the debate is on security issues. They're the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. The president often represents Poland at the NATO summit, as Andrzej Duda did last week. And so this is going to be one of those issues where he's going to try and really insert himself into the debate and to put pressure on the government.
And given that, I mean, we've spoken a number of times, both over the course of the campaign and since election night. Nawrocki's campaign was largely Eurosceptic. In many ways, it was Trumpian. Do you expect that to carry over into his term?
Well, he's certainly more sceptical about deeper European integration than the government, as is his party, Law and Justice. And one of the areas where he's particularly sceptical about deeper European integration is developing a European defence identity separately from the NATO alliance. He is in favour of European countries spending much more money on defence, coming up to the 5% that Poland currently spends, all in favour of that, but it has to be within the context of the transatlantic alliance, and because he argues, and Law and Justice argues, that the United States is Poland's only credible military security guarantor, and he would feel that there is actually a risk to the EU trying to develop a separate European defence identity, because this might actually encourage America and Mr. Trump to withdraw from Europe, to loosen the transatlantic alliance, which he argues would be an absolute disaster for Poland's military security.
Nawrocki says he will meet with both Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at some point pretty soon after he moves in to the presidential palace. For Nawrocki, who's so far been pretty cosy with Trump but hardened his tone on Ukraine on the election trail, is this a case of Washington ties are his priority, Ukraine is a necessity?
Certainly Washington ties are going to be his priority. He has a very good relationship with Mr. Trump, who met him at a critical point during the election campaign. Members of the Trump administration supported him during the campaign, and he's going to make sure that that relationship stays very close. And contrasting his close relationship with Mr. Trump and the American administration with the poor relationship that he argues the government has. In terms of Ukraine, well, Poland's position on Ukraine will be unchanged in the sense that Mr. Nawrocki fully supports NATO in its fight against Russia. He will continue to back giving full military, diplomatic, humanitarian aid But he'll also have a much more transactional relationship, a much more instrumental relationship with Ukraine. And he'll be much more assertive when Poland's interests clash with those of Ukraine, as they do on things like historical issues or economic issues like Ukrainian farmers' access to the Polish agricultural market. Mr. Duda was prepared to give Ukraine pretty unconditional support. Mr. Nawrocki will be much more cautious about this. He's also expressed skepticism about Ukraine joining the EU and NATO, which again is a significant break with his predecessor. Although they're both from Law and Justice, they have a somewhat different approach to the Ukrainian issue.
Well, in fact, on the campaign trail, he effectively ruled out Ukraine's accession to NATO. As you mentioned, he's been cold on accession to the EU, particularly anytime soon. Does Kyiv have reason to be worried about Karol Nawrocki becoming president in August?
Well, I think that he's going to leverage the support that Poland has given to Ukraine, or encourage the government to leverage that support much, much more. So I think that whereas up until now, Poland seemed to be prepared to accept that because they have this overarching common interest in stopping Russian expansionism and in particular in Ukraine either winning the war or having a peace on very favorable terms, Poland would effectively give support to Ukraine without any kind of conditions. Having said that, I think it's completely wrong to understand Mr. Nawrocki as some kind of a Russophile or adopting the Putin narrative. Russia, let's not forget, actually has an arrest warrant out against Mr. Nawrocki. He is persona non grata in Moscow. There's no doubt that he's committed to the Ukrainian cause in terms of supporting them in the war. It's simply that he's going to try and leverage the support that Poland is giving to Ukraine to try and advance Polish interests as he sees it.
Given your expertise, I want to do a quick pulse check on the ruling coalition. So we know the fact that this paralysing cohabitation between the current president, Andrzej Duda, who you've mentioned, and Prime Minister Donald Tusk is set to continue when Nawrocki takes over. We know he can use the presidential veto power to continue turning away Donald Tusk's proposed reforms. Do you see a potential government collapse on the cards at this point, even after Donald Tusk has survived this self-imposed vote of confidence?
I don't see a government collapse as being on the cards imminently because it's in the interests of all the coalition partners to hold together. In particular, I mean, the glue that really holds political formations and governments together in Poland, I mean, let's be honest, it's access to state appointments and state patronage. And if the government was to fall apart, there would be an election. These parties would lose that election and they would lose that access to those state appointments, which is really important to them. So there's no imminent prospect, I think, of the government falling apart. The problem is more the government kind of rotting from within. Karol Nawrocki's victory has changed the political dynamic very radically in Poland, partly because it was pitched as a vote of no confidence in the government, and therefore his victory is seen as a huge vote of no confidence in the government, but also because it's really put them on the back foot and shown that they don't really have any kind of a plan B. There is not a clear plan, a clear vision, a clear strategy that the government has to, in response to the fact that it's going to have to work with a hostile president for the next 2.5 years. 2.5 years is a long time. It can still change things around, but unless it changes that political dynamic, unless it comes up with a plan to deal with a Nawrocki presidency, which it's not showing evidence of doing yet, it's going to be in trouble.
Briefly on these temporary border checks with Germany and Lithuania, Prime Minister Donald Tusk says the move is necessary to stem the uncontrolled flow of migrants. Figures show the numbers are actually much lower. Do you sense that this is a political response from the government, perhaps more so than a practical response?
Yes, I think it's absolutely a political response. I mean, one of the things we've seen with Donald Tusk is that he's absolutely determined to get out ahead on the issue of migration. He thinks that this is a potentially lethal one for his government and indeed for liberal centrist parties in Poland and across Europe. And his strategy has always been to not allow himself to be outflanked by Law and Justice and by the right on this issue. He really didn't want to introduce these border controls. He knows that it's going to cause inconvenience for Poles who have to cross the border a lot, for tourists, and it's also going to cause problematic relations with the German government. But the way that the issue has developed over the last few days has become extremely problematic for the government and has forced him to respond. And one thing he's made absolutely clear, that he does not want to be outflanked by Law and Justice on the issue of migration, and seems to be prepared to do pretty much anything to avoid that from happening.
Alex Shabiak, Professor of Politics at the University of Sussex, thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much.
And that's all for World News tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.